Okay, so today we're reading another Platonic dialogue, and this one's called the Euthyphro. Just like the Credo, it's named after the guy who Socrates is talking to. This guy's a bit different than Credo, isn't he? The setting is different. This is actually right before Socrates goes into his famous trial, which is going to be the last law case he ever gets involved in. Credo's a friend of Socrates. Euthyphro seems to be a friend of Socrates too, right? They know each other. How is Euthyphro different from Credo, in your view? You've read both of the dialogues. If you had to describe Euthyphro, do you know anybody like him? What seems to be driving him? How does he think he's better than pretty much everybody else? Because he says it, doesn't he? I know more about this than everybody else does. So what is it? Yeah.
Doesn't he think he knows what is evil, what doing wrong is, more than anyone else? Like, he can distinguish that from all.
That's a very important part of it. Yeah, he thinks, this goes back to the Credo, doesn't it? Because in the Credo, Socrates is concerned with who actually knows about these things. The many don't know about these things. You notice Euthyphro doesn't like the many either, does he? He says, the many, they're full of it. They think they know about all this sort of stuff. I know about this stuff. And yeah, he thinks he knows what's right and wrong, and he thinks he knows it so well that he's actually going to prosecute his own father in a law case. It's pretty unheard of, at that time. We do that sort of thing now. But there were some, I'll talk about why. There were some definite reasons why you wouldn't do that sort of thing back in ancient Greece. It's not just right and wrong, though. What else does he think he knows better about than everybody else? What's the dialogue about? What's the key thing? Yeah.
Piety and piety?
Piety, yeah. Now, that's not a word that we use a lot, is it? Piety, or being, the adjective that we use is being pious, and the opposite is impiety. Have any of you ever said, if somebody is pious, or talked about piety in your life up to this point? Have you used that word before? You haven't used that word, but you've used that concept. What do you think it's close to, that we would say in our own language? Yeah.
Being holy.
Very good. So, holiness, or unholiness, or being profane, or something like that. And being holy. Now, if we put it like that, Euthyphro thinks he knows more about what it means to be holy than other people. Now, do you recognize Euthyphro in your experience? Everybody's got some sort of relative or friend or acquaintance who believes themselves much closer to God and have a much better idea about what's holy and what's unholy, what God likes and what God doesn't like, than the rest of us. And they may, in fact, that could be true. Maybe they actually do. We recognize certain people as particularly good guides in that respect. Think about Mother Teresa, who died, 2-3 years ago? She was considered pretty holy, right? If you ask somebody who's a saint, she's one of the first people that they tend to name. And what made her, holy? She seemed to have been a good lady. She did some good stuff, right? What did she do? Don't even remember? She make a lot of money on Wall Street? And then give it all to the poor. No? What did she do? Does anyone recall offhand? Something in India, right? What does India have a lot of? besides, say elephants or rivers or things like that. More than us.
Poverty?
Yeah, poor people. And poverty in India means being desperately poor. I mean, we have this poverty index in the United States, and there's big news because the poverty index is, there's more people in poverty in the United States than ever before. But, like people pointed out, being poor in the United States means you still have an air conditioner and a car and a TV and a game, console of some sort. Just means you don't have as much stuff as everybody else. There are some people who are desperately poor in the United States, but not so much as in India. And she took care of them, the ones who are poor and who are sick, and the ones who are dying, who people thought, they're not good for anything. Why even waste time on them? They're dying. Why not help all these other people over here? And people looked to that and they said, that's a holy woman. That's somebody who is in touch with, what does it mean to be holy? It means having something to do with God or the divine, right? If you say somebody's holy, you don't just mean that they read the Bible a lot. You mean that they read the Bible a lot, and presumably because of that they know something about God. Or maybe they don't read the Bible a lot, but they practice what are called the virtues, the theological virtues like faith and hope and love or charity. Presumably that tells them something about God, and that makes them closer to God. How is Euthyphro? He's not very much like Mother Teresa, is he? Can you think of anybody he's like, in your experience? Anybody in our culture? We do have a lot of people who think they know an awful lot about what God wants, both on, the right and the left. And they talk about it a lot. Sometimes they'll say things like, God wants you to vote Republican, God wants you to vote Democrat. How do they know that? I don't see that anywhere in Scripture. God wants you to be nice to people. God's for gay marriage, God's against gay marriage. People argue both sides of that, don't they? And very often they see themselves the way Euthyphro does. And the other people, they don't know what they're talking about. I do. I'm the one who's holy. So that's this guy Euthyphro's character. He, in a way, he's fitting what Plato wants. Plato doesn't want you to look to the many. He wants you to, stand out and to think about things yourself. Does Euthyphro think a lot about things? What do you think? Does he make it a constant practice? Where does he get his first ideas about what's holy and what's not holy from? In this dialogue, what do you remember about it? Before we get into all the argument stuff, how does he know that prosecuting his own father is the right thing to do? You don't have to raise your hands. You can just say, shout it out if you want to. What do you remember? What does he say? I'm doing this, and I know it's right because...
something based on seals, or something like that.
Based on what?
Seals, the seals, like the god.
Right, Zeus, yeah. Yeah, Zeus did the same thing. If you know your ancient Greek mythology, Zeus's dad was another god, and his dad, Kronos, had another dad, Uranos, who was another god, and they were all bad guys. Uranos tried to, destroy all of his children. Kronos tried to destroy all of his children. They were very savage. There's a whole story about this, and Zeus ends up having to, take action against his own father. Well, that makes it sound like that's the right thing to do, right? I mean, if the gods are doing it, then why shouldn't you do it? What else did the Greek gods do that might be a little questionable in our time? Can anyone remember? Even if you think about movies, maybe you haven't read it, but you saw it in some of the movies that have come out. What else do the gods do? Yeah.
Will they cheat on their spouses a lot?
Yeah. Mostly the male gods cheat on their spouses. Zeus is the worst one of all. Where do you think all these demigods and heroes come from? They're the sons of Zeus for the most part, because Zeus is constantly going around and finding some female human being that he thinks is attractive, and then getting her knocked up. And usually she doesn't have anything to say about it, and he appears in all different forms: a golden rain, a bull, a swan, all these different things. This was part of their mythology, but this was the way they saw the world. And where were they getting this? We have in our culture, which has been formed by what we call Abrahamic religions, right? Judaism, Christianity, Islam. There's a holy book for each one of those. There wasn't a holy book for the Greeks. They had all these different poems and hymns and things like that. It was kind of a mess. And so Euthyphro is saying, well, that's where we get our ideas about what's holy and unholy. And because Zeus did this to his own dad, it's okay for me to do this to mine. Forget what everyone else thinks about it. I know, because I've actually studied this stuff. They don't know. That's why they think it's kind of strange. Now notice what Socrates says to Euthyphro at this point. He says, how little does the common herd know of the nature of right and truth? A man must be an extraordinary man and have made great strides in wisdom before he could have seen his way to such an action. He's talking about Euthyphro doing this pretty chancy thing of prosecuting his father. If you were going to do that sort of thing, you really ought to be sure that it's the right thing. So you must have really made sure that you know exactly what the right thing to do is in this case. Didn't you, Euthyphro? And Euthyphro said, oh, of course. How does it actually turn out? Has he thought any of this through? See a lot of head shaking. He thought some of it through. He's not totally, going straight by the seat of his pants. He thought, hey, there's a principle here. Somebody committed a murder. Gods hate murder. Got to prosecute the murder. I know it's my own dad. Hate to have to do this, but it's pollution to allow a murder to remain in your midst. So the key question that it starts with is this question about, is it okay to prosecute your father? And why does it come up, in terms of piety? Well, in ancient civilizations, really in most civilizations until modernity, parents were regarded in a different way than they are by us today. You remember when we were looking at the Credo, Socrates, the laws speak to him almost like a father would speak to a son, and they say, I made you. I created you. I'm the one who gave you life. I gave you this. I gave you that. Well, the family and the relationship between father and son was very asymmetrical. So, and it still is in some families today. So the father was way up here and the son is way down here. And that'll change when the son becomes his own grown-up father later on, and there's a son down below him. Daughters, at this time, this is very sex, segregated society, so daughters almost don't count at all. But the view was that transgressing against your parents, doing something against your parents, was not just hurting another human being. There was something distinctively bad about it. So, for instance, killing a father, killing a mother, that was a worse crime than killing some ordinary person on the street. And it wasn't just because you should love your mother and father. It's because it was felt, there was sort of a religious impulse to this. It was felt to violate the order of things. So in prosecuting his father, Euthyphro is doing something very radical. And it's not something that's easy for us to relate to. I mean, you can think about this, for example. Actually had to start thinking about this once I had kids, but you could think about it now. None of you have kids, right? I hope. Good. Because you're all way too young to have kids yet. What if, I love my son and my daughter. What if they committed horrible crimes? This happens. There are cases where somebody seems to be pretty good and they're loved by people, and yet they do horrific things. I used to teach guys like that when I was teaching in the prison. What would I do? Would I turn her in? My own daughter? Let's say let's say she killed somebody, and she didn't just do it because she was fighting in self-defense or something like that. Let's say she had a rival at her work, and she decided, I'm going to kill her. I'm going to take care of this person. And she did kill them, and then she dismembered them, hid them out in the swamp. And let's say somebody else found out about it. She killed that person too. So she's killing witnesses. That's pretty bad, isn't it? Would I turn her in? That's the sort of dilemma you don't ever want to have to face. It would be very difficult, no matter which side you choose, to feel as if you're doing the right thing, wouldn't it? You can think about this in terms of your own life. Let's say your own parents committed a terrible crime like that. What would you do? Would you say, they're my parents, I love them. I'm going to protect them. I'm going to make sure that nothing happens to them. I'm going to keep this under wraps. How many of you would do that? How many of you would turn them in? Nobody?
Depends the situation, I guess.
Okay. Well, that's fair
If
enough.
your parents were like terrible people or something.
If you didn't like
They're
them.
like terrible people, then
If they had a bad track record. Like if this is the second time they've done it, right? Yeah.
Or maybe if they were committing a crime and you were the victim of the crime, that might be,
That would be a lot easier to turn them
yeah,
in.
that'd be a
wouldn't
different
it?
story too.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I wouldn't want my own parents to have to go to jail or to punished or anything, unless I was the victim.
Yeah, and actually with our legal system, you can sometimes get in trouble for not turning people in if you know about it. So that's another thing. Greeks didn't quite have that, but so these are all considerations. This gives you an idea of the weight to this. So Euthyphro is going to make this be about piety. This is the pious thing to do. This is what the gods want. And now the dialogue's going to shift, right? Socrates says, okay, so what is piety? And I've created, like I said, I've created a little handout for you with all the arguments in it. But let's look at what the actual words are. So Socrates says, is not piety in every action the same? If we want to say things about moral values like piety or justice, doesn't it have to be the same thing in each case? Doesn't it have to be consistent? Impiety, again, is it not always the opposite? So Socrates says, okay, what is piety and what is impiety? Tell me what that is, because I don't really know. And there's some background information to this too, right? What's he being charged with? He's being charged with violating the religious conventions by this guy Miletus. So he's kind of playing up Euthyphro and saying, you're so smart, maybe you can help me out before I have to go into court. Tell me what piety is, so when I go in there I can say, hey, I'm okay, I'm pious. Miletus, he's not pious. So what does Euthyphro say? He says, piety is doing as I'm doing. That is to say, prosecuting anyone who's guilty of murder, sacrilege, or any similar crime, whether he be your father or mother, or whoever he may be. That makes no difference. Not to prosecute them as impiety. Let's sort of pause here, because Socrates is going to have a problem with that. But let's think about this. In our system these days, we're a nation that doesn't follow. There's very few people. There are a few neo-pagans who experiment with following the ancient Greek gods, but they're the minority of a minority of a minority. What religions do most people belong to here in this country? Judaism is one big one in this country. What else? Christianity. And Christianity, actually Judaism is split over a couple different, ways of going about it. There's Orthodox, Hasidic, Reform. Christianity is split into a whole bunch of different denominations. There are some really big ones, Catholics, Baptists, Methodists, those are the largest three. What else? What else do we have here in this country? We get into smaller groups in this country, but majorities in other countries, right? Yeah. Muslims, yeah. What else? Those are the three big Abrahamic religions. What other religions have we got going here? That you could think of. Anything else come to mind? Like Buddhist or
Hinduism.
Hindus, right? Yeah. And now in Hinduism, there are a lot of different gods, but they're understood as being all sort of images of one single divine principle. And things have transformed a lot. You're not going to find a lot of Hindus or Buddhists or Muslims or Christians or Jews saying it's okay to cheat on your spouse because the gods do that, right? I can't think of anybody I know in any of those groups who would say that. So there's certain things that the Greeks seem to think that was okay because their gods did it, but we don't. What do we, in our society, what sort of actions would we say are holy?
Praying.
Yeah, praying. That's a big one. Yeah.
Charities, like
Say again?
charities, like feeding the homeless people, or
Yeah.
like donating things.
Every single one of the major religions teaches that taking care of the poor or the vulnerable is a meritorious act. I think they're playing with the beakers or something in there. It's kind of a nice, nice sound. Yeah, charity.
Terrible.
Terrible. Well, see, we differ on aesthetics, right? The beautiful and the ugly. We don't quite agree on it, do we? Just like the Credo said. Yeah, doing charitable actions. What else?
Going to church.
Yeah, going to church or to mosque or to synagogue or to temple, participating within a community. That's seen as being holy. What else? How does religion get mixed up in politics? What sort of acts are seen as unholy or holy? Yeah.
Well, a lot of, some believe like abortion is unholy, I guess, if you want.
You're right, yeah. And that's one where the Christian churches are kind of split. The more traditional conservative churches, it's an abomination. It's way up there. Some of the more liberal churches are kind of, well, it's up to the person. And then some are actually like, but there are very few are sort of pro-abortion. So yeah, that's an issue. There's a lot of talk during election years about this is the right thing to do because this is what God wants, right? What else? What other sort of things get mixed in there? Think about gay marriage, right? New York just passed a gay marriage bill. Some people consider that to be an abomination. If they do, it's not likely to be based on some sort of secular morality. It's going to be based on some sort of religious morality, some idea about what's holy and what's unholy. There's a lot of things like that. So we have a lot of things we could relate to. We could give examples. Who do you consider to be a holy person? Does anybody have sort of a public figure you could point to and say, I think they actually are on the right track, they are in touch with God? Some people are shaking their heads. Do you think nobody's a good example? Or? I mean, I can think of quite a few, but the older you get, if you pay attention to your own life, and you look at it very realistically, the lower and lower your assessment of how well you've done with it goes down. And the more you're willing to cut people some slack and say, yeah, I think they're probably a better person than I am. Anybody who you'd look up to, or let's say you wanted some advice about how to get close to God. Is there anybody you could go to?
Priest.
Yeah, a priest. Hopefully they're a good priest, right? I've known some good priests and I've known some bad priests. Sometimes a good priest can become a bad priest, and sometimes a bad priest can become a good priest too. Right? Who else? There's a lot of people who are holy who aren't priests. Well, I'll let you think about that. Now, what have we done here? We've looked at examples. Have we defined what's holy? Do you have any clearer idea at this point of what being holy would consist in? Some way to define it to another person? You do have a better idea? Or?
I guess so. I mean, I don't know. I guess, yeah, sure. Guess so. I don't really know what to say.
That's okay. Some of this is supposed to be puzzling the first couple times around. When we just look at examples, this is sort of giving you the answer as far as Plato goes. Plato is never for examples. He uses a lot of examples, but he'll always say these are just examples. They don't tell you what the thing actually is. So if we want to know what justice is, we don't look at just one case in Plato's case. We need some sort of definition. We need some sort of knowledge that could apply not just in this case, but in this case, in this case, in this case. That's pretty distinctive to Plato. And I think that, all of you will run into situations in your life where you're going to say that to somebody as well. Don't just give me some examples. Tell me what you're actually talking about. I don't understand what you're saying. You're just throwing a bunch of examples at me. These aren't clarifying anything for me. That's what Socrates is doing with Euthyphro. So what do they do next? Socrates says, I don't want some examples. Give me something I can sink my teeth into. What does Euthyphro say to him? Piety. He gives you a definition at that point. We're going to try a whole bunch of definitions of what piety is. What does he say piety is first? It's not just doing what I do, it's...
Which is your type.
Very good. So, what is dear to the gods? Now, again, this is not language that we often use in our own speaking, thinking. We don't say, that's dear to me, do we? We might say that somebody's a dear, or we start out a letter, dear so-and-so, but that's a formality. Actually, whenever I email you guys, I start out, dear so-and-so. Does that mean that I hold you in my heart and cherish you? Really? It does?
Can't remember our names yet.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't even know who I am cherishing. I just feel you're such good people. Well, that's not me. I can tell you that right there. I use dear and sincerely as markers. Here's where I begin. Here's where I end. Right? When we say that something's dear, we mean what? That we like it. That we approve of it. That we cherish it. So what's dear to the gods, what the gods like. And again, we could think of examples of the things the gods liked back in ancient Greece, certain kinds of behavior. The gods also liked sacrifices a lot. If you read ancient Greek texts, you'll see them offering, sometimes, small sacrifices, sometimes huge sacrifices. There's a word hecatomb that actually means like 100 cattle being sacrificed at once. Agamemnon actually sacrifices his own daughter in order to get the ships to be able to go to Troy. He wasn't happy about it, but he did it. And things that the gods like, that's what holiness is. Doesn't that sound pretty good? That seems to make sense, right? Let's put it in contemporary terms. Instead of gods, God. Because that's usually how people talk these days, right? What's holiness? behaving in the way God wants you to. Doing charity, right? Not lying to people, not stealing. Maybe following the 10 Commandments. Maybe that's holiness. Reading the Bible from time to time. Or maybe every day. Praying, 5 times a day or 7 times a day. Doing the liturgy of the hours, if you really want to be hardcore, or something like that. There's a problem that the Greeks had that we don't have quite so much, though. What's the problem that Socrates points out? Yeah.
All the gods don't agree on one thing.
Yeah, and that's a big problem, isn't it? Because, actually, again, if you read the ancient Greek stories, you find, like in the Trojan War, some of the gods are on one side, some of the gods are on the other side. And they're actually messing around with each other. Or if you read the Odyssey, how many of you have read the Odyssey? Okay, so who hates Odysseus? Just hates his guts. Yeah.
Oh wait, no, never mind. I didn't like Odysseus when I read this. I thought he was really weird, but that wasn't what you meant.
You hated his guts?
Well, I just didn't really like him. I thought he was annoying.
That's okay. Who was the god who hated his guts? Does anyone remember? God of the sea? That's why it took him so long to get back. Yeah.
Poseidon?
Poseidon, yeah, because Odysseus blinds his son, who's a freak, and then tells him, which was kind of dumb, hey, if anybody asks you who blinded you, it was Odysseus. And so, Poseidon's not happy about that. Who's for Odysseus? Who actually turns out to... It's kind of a funny thing. She seems to be in love with him almost. One of the goddesses. Anyone know? Anyone remember offhand? She's kind of in love with him, and she also loves his son. Not in the same kind of way as Odysseus. She is, by the way, a maiden goddess. She doesn't actually hook up with anybody. Athena. So Athena and Poseidon don't see eye to eye on things. As a matter of fact, Athena tries to trick Poseidon. She waits until he's off somewhere else and then goes to Zeus and she says, hey, what about Odysseus? Can we let him come back yet? Because she knows that Poseidon is out of the room. Because if he was in the room, they would be fighting. They wouldn't agree. And what do the gods disagree about? Remember back to the Credo. What do human beings disagree about? These moral values. Do you remember what those... We talked about 3 ranges of moral values. What were they? Anyone remember offhand? Two of them were really straightforward, and one was a little bit harder to translate. Actually, Socrates doesn't just say we disagree about these, we actually get angry at each other about these. And we do, don't we? The good and the bad, right? What else? Yeah.
The just and unjust.
Very good. The just and the unjust. And then there was a harder one, yeah.
The honorable and dishonest.
Good. We'll say honorable, dishonorable. Understanding that for the Greeks, this was kind of wider, and it included the beautiful and the ugly, these aesthetic things. And do we disagree about these sort of things? And when we disagree about these things, like Socrates points out, are there easy ways for us to reach agreement on them? If we disagree about how many square feet the room is, what can we do? Measure, right. And if I measure it, and I come up with a number that it's like, I'm just going to guess, say 225 square feet, and you say it's 240, and most of you say it's 240, I'm probably wrong, aren't I? Or if I measure it and I get all different measures each time, I'm probably wrong. There's a way to decide that. Is it so easy to decide things when it's good and evil? or just and unjust, let alone ugly and beautiful, or honorable and dishonorable. And human beings don't agree about these. Well, the gods don't either. So what are we going to do in cases like this? What's our recourse? I guess we're just screwed, right? We can't decide at all. Or can we? Does Euthyphro think there's a way out? Why wouldn't it be a problem in our society so much? Let's say you're a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian. Why don't you have to worry about the fact that the gods disagree with each other? Yeah.
Well, in those religions, there's only one God.
Yeah, so there's some sort of consensus because there's only one. I mean, with the Christianity, you've got the Trinity, but presumably, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are all on the same page, right?
And there's only one opinion on the whole thing.
Exactly, yeah. So maybe we could look at things where there actually is some consensus, like, murder. All the gods think murder is bad. Now, does that get you off, does that settle all the disagreements? No, because we don't always agree about what counts as murder in what cases. Think about our own society. If I kill somebody in self-defense, some of you would say I murdered the person. Others would say I did the right thing. Right? Let's say, actually, let's take a case. I'm going to close this door too, by the way. I don't want a bad room. Let's say I find out that somebody intends to attack one of you, right? And I'm the only person who can stop them, and I choose to kill them. Did I do the right thing, or did I do the wrong thing? Some of you would probably say two wrongs don't make a right, wouldn't you? Killing is wrong no matter what. Some of you would say, well, this doesn't actually count as murder, it counts as something else, wouldn't you? So, well, it wouldn't be self-defense, though. See, when it's self-defense, it seems to be very straightforward, but then it starts to get stickier the further we get away from the self, which is why I brought up that example. But there could be some things where the gods all agree. Stealing's wrong. Even the Greek god Hermes, who is the god of thieves. Let's say he agrees, right? So maybe there are some things that are dear to all the gods. Is that going to work? Here's where we get to some really interesting stuff. This is where we come to something that is known as the Euthyphro dilemma. And Euthyphro goes one way with it. I'm going to introduce a term here. And we haven't actually talked about much this semester. Philosophy has a lot of different subject areas, a lot of different disciplines within it. And what we've been doing a lot in this class is what's called ethics, talking about right and wrong. That's the part of philosophy that deals with that. Or we've been talking about what's called epistemology. Who actually knows things? Who doesn't know things? Who should we trust? Philosophy of religion is concerned with issues like, does God exist? Or does not, can you provide an argument one way or the other? Or is religion and morality, religion and ethics, are they connected in some way? That's an issue in the philosophy of religion. And we're going to look at it a little bit. That's an issue that comes up a lot. If you Google if you Google or you go into YouTube and you look up Euthyphro, you're not going to find an awful lot of videos or websites actually talking about the dialogue itself. What they're going to talk about is philosophy of religion, and then what's called the Euthyphro dilemma. And it's not exactly the same as what's going on in the text. So let's look at what's going on in the text first, and then let's look at this really interesting dilemma. What does Socrates say? He says, and I've put this for you in that condensed version as issue 4. he says, what I want to first understand is whether the pious or the holy is beloved by the gods because it's holy, or is it holy because it's beloved of the gods, or dear? Do the gods like the holy, and that's what makes it holy? Or is it something that's, good by itself, and therefore they recognize that, and that's why they like it? And this could work with anything that you could think of more broadly. Think about your own desires and goods. Is something good because you desire it, or is something desired by you because it's good? Sometimes it's one way, sometimes it's the other, isn't it? How many of you desire to go to see the doctor? Nobody's a chronic, what do you call those people who go to the doctor all the time? They get a kick out of it. Hypochondriac. Somebody's a hypochondriac? You might actually desire to go to the doctor because you get sick, you want to please somebody. You don't desire it because you really like it. It is a good thing though, right? Going to the doctor every so often. Get checked up. Make sure you don't have cancer. Something else wrong with you. These things are dissociable. You can split them apart, desire and goodness. Well, it's the same way with the gods and holiness. Let's say we take an action, like say abortion, right? Let's say we take unholiness, or what God's, or the God, or whatever doesn't like. Is abortion something that's wrong because God doesn't like it? Because God says don't do it? Or does God say don't do it because it's something bad? These are two different possibilities. And so Socrates says, well, what is it? Is the holy beloved by the gods because it's holy? Or is it holy because it's beloved by the gods? And he says, so it's love because it is holy, not holy because it's love. The gods love these things because they are in fact good. They're sort of recognizing the good in it. That's what Euthyphro says. And then he says, then that which is dear to the gods is not actually holy, nor is that which is holy loved of or by God. As you affirm it, they're two separate things. Here's where it gets really tricky. And here's where you may have been following along so far, and then you hit that and you said, what the hell's going on here? I don't understand this at all. This doesn't make any sense. Did you have that sort of dislocation? Anyone have that? People are nodding their heads. It happens to me, actually, every time I read the dialogue. So let's look at what's going on here. We've got three different terms, right? We've got holy, we've got loved by the gods. Probably should use a lowercase. And then we've got loved by the gods, holy, and dear to the gods. Okay, so let's think this through. He's saying the holy is loved because it's holy, not holy because it's loved, right? So we'll say X is holy, and that's the reason why X is loved by gods. Well, it's such a habit to put God in a capital G, isn't it? You can tell we're living in a largely monotheistic civilization. That's what's going on there, right? But then he's also saying that how do we define the holy? Right? What's dear to the gods is what's holy. So how do we know it's holy? X is dear to the gods, therefore X is holy. Now, here's where it gets really tricky. There's something else being assumed here. Socrates is saying this can't be the same as this, because they don't have the same relationship to being holy. Is everybody following that? Let me say that again, because this is a sticking point. These don't have the same relationship to being holy. Being dear to the gods has a different relationship to being holy than being loved by the gods has to being holy. One is causing the holiness, the other one is a cause of the holiness. So they can't be the same thing. Now he's not spelling this out very well, is he? He's just kind of moving on, and Euthyphro kind of, sort of like, in a boxing match. Euthyphro gets the pop to the face, is surprised, and now doesn't know what to do. Euthyphro's not very good in argument. If you were very good in argument, you could point out to Socrates that maybe there's a flaw in the reasoning here. And I'm not going to actually point out what the flaw in the reasoning is at this point in the semester. I'd like you to think about that and to puzzle about that. If you really want it, I will give it to you later on. I'll give you a way in which this could make good sense. But I do want you to puzzle about it. I want you to try to wrap your head around this and think through it. I don't want to give you all the answers. I want you to try to work out some of the answers. What does this mean, though? This means that Euthyphro's position couldn't possibly be right, so that can't be a good definition. That holiness is that which is dear to the gods. So that's what we call an aporia. That's, in Greek, aporia means you get stuck in some place and you can't figure out the right way to get out. This is a dialogue full of those sorts of things. Let's look at the Euthyphro dilemma now. This is a little bit different, but it's based on this. Euthyphro dilemma says either X is good because God loves it, or commands it, or pick whatever you like. Or God loves or commands X because X is good. And the dilemma says you have to pick one or the other of these. Are you guys familiar with this term dilemma? You've all heard it before, right? So what is a dilemma? It's not just a problem. There's a little bit more structure to it.
You can't figure out.
You can't figure it out, not because you don't understand the structure, but because you don't like where either place is going. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to say.
You don't like where either thing is leading to. So let's look at these. Well, let's think what this means. So, if something is good, it's good because God commands it or loves it. Right? So, how do you know that abortion is wrong? God says don't do it. If God changed his mind tomorrow and said abort as many fetuses as possible, then it would become good. Right? There's a lot of things. If you think about the Old Testament, there's a lot of commandments in there. There's not just 10. There's over 600. And some of them, really make a lot of sense. Don't kill, right? That shows up more than once. Don't move boundary markers. That makes sense, right? You're supposed to actually, we don't do that even in our society. If you move boundary markers, pretty soon somebody's going to get a surveyor and sue you because it's a bad thing to do. You shall not boil a calf in its mother's milk. That is one of the mitzvah. That's one of the commandments. That one's either in Leviticus or Deuteronomy or Numbers. Nobody's quite sure what that one means. But that's actually the basis for a part of the kosher law. That's why in kosher kitchens, meat, is kept completely separate from dairy. Now, what's wrong with mixing meat and dairy? I like a cheeseburger. I like pizza, sausage. Why does God have a problem with that? It's not because of some intrinsic evil to sausage pizza, is it?
It's because God said so.
Yeah, so that's one end of the dilemma. God says, this is good, therefore this is good. The other possibility is, why does God say things are good? Because they actually are good. And he's just sort of recognizing it. It's not his will that makes it good, or his say-so. As a matter of fact, you could figure it out on your own without God, maybe. Here's why it's a dilemma for what we call the theist. If you Google this or you YouTube this, you'll see atheists using this as a sort of wedge against, usually against Christians. Theists mean people who believe in God. So Christians would be one branch of theists. Atheists are those who don't believe in God, right? We talked about this before. So atheists will say, you've got to pick one side of this. And if you pick this side, what's the bad consequence? Bless you. What's the bad consequence? It looks like morality then becomes totally arbitrary. So I mean, if God changed his mind next week and said, that 10 Commandments stuff, I was actually wrong about that, I want you to commit adultery. Then it would be a requirement, and you'd be wrong, you'd be a bad person if you didn't commit adultery. Assuming, of course, you had a spouse. Right? There could be some preconditions. Let's say God said, 10 Commandments isn't enough. I think we need 28. And he started picking stuff like, you will only cross the street at the crosswalk. You will not try to steal home base if the game is too close. Things like that. It's kind of crazy. But presumably, given this view of the relationship between morality and religion, that would be one of the consequences. So that doesn't sound very good, does it? Anybody like the idea of a totally arbitrary God doling out rules as he or she or it sees fit?
Well, isn't that the way it seems?
That'd
be great. People follow everything that the gods do. Well, not everything that they do, but what they say is right.
Do they in fact do that?
They're supposed to.
Oh, yeah, but supposed to and actually does are two very different things. I know very few theists who seem to do a very good job of following what it is that their faith teaches, and I include myself in that. I do an awful job in some respects. Yeah, I mean, you are supposed to do, if you have some sort of code of morals, you are supposed to follow it. The question here is, where it would come from. Does it come from God, sort of in an arbitrary manner, or is there some sort of reason? So let's say we look at the second one. Maybe God commands you, to do certain things or not to do certain things because they're actually bad or good things to do. So when God says, don't kill people, maybe it's because God actually doesn't want you to kill people because he thinks people are good. Taking their lives away is bad. He's just sort of recognizing some sort of moral truth that's out there independent of God. Yeah?
But isn't that why we have free will? Because free will allows you to make your own decisions, so these are kind of just like guidelines that they hope you will live by and kind of are, like, you have free will, so that's why you can decide what you want to do.
So we have free will in order to decide what we want to do. Yeah.
There's like guidelines you can follow, but.
And we're given a command and we can choose whether to follow it or not. And this leads to, there's some philosophical issues. Again, in the philosophy of religion, we explore these in much greater detail. We're going to talk about some of this stuff later on in the semester, like will and all that. Free will won't get you out of this problem, because this is about where does the goodness come from? Where do the values come from? You can say that free will by itself is a good. Somebody who we're not going to read this semester, St. Augustine, and some other people who we are going to read, like Anselm and Aquinas, think that free will by itself is a good thing to have, and then we screw it up, quite often. But we're given that chance, because being given that chance is a good thing. But even with that, how would we know that being given that chance is a good thing? Do we need God to tell us that? Or could we figure that out if we thought about it long and hard enough? So here's again where the atheist would say, well look, if God doesn't create what's good and bad, that's not dependent on God, what do we need God in the picture for at all? I mean, or let's say we actually say, well, we need him to get things started. Maybe we don't need him after that. You got your 10 Commandments. Now, quit messing around and just start following them. You don't have to go to church. Just follow the moral code. Try to think about what's actually good and bad. This is the dilemma, and neither one of these is really going to work for a theist, right? There are some theists who are perfectly willing to say, God is totally arbitrary. I'm going to follow him no matter what. If he tells me to kill my neighbor, that's going to be A-okay. Very few theists actually hold that. Nobody wants to say, if God commands me to do something that I actually think is objectively evil, it would become good because God says so. There are a few, but there's very few. Do theists in general want to say, well, there's good and bad, and you don't have to have God to have any sort of understanding of these? If you do, then there's not much point in being a theist, is there? Except maybe you like going to church. It's a nice place to hang out, or makes you feel warm and fuzzy, or something like that. So this is a real dilemma, isn't it? It's a real dilemma in the sense that you can feel its weight. And any of you who've come into the class with some sort of faith, I'm not trying to break you of your faith or anything like that. I don't want you to go home and say, that Dr. Sadler, he just ruined me for life because he threw this at me. What I'm saying is this is something that you can feel the weight of. There's a logical structure to it. It does seem like a real dilemma, and it is tied to our reading. There is a way out of it. Actually, there's several ways out of it. But again, I'm not going to tell you what they are right now. I'd like you, if you think this is a real problem, I'd like you to think about this. Don't YouTube it. Don't just go out there, because some of the solutions are out there on YouTube. But I would like you to actually think about it. That's a real issue in the philosophy of religion. Are morality and religion connected at all? Or can we totally separate them? And that's an important issue for you guys as voters. Does your faith, if you have any faith, or other people's faith, should that influence how you do things in society at all? That's something worth thinking about. So after that detour, let's come back to Euthyphro. He tries out a couple other things. So I'm going to run you through those arguments very quickly. The next attempt is maybe it's part of justice. Holiness, what was justice? Right and wrong. So there could be a right and wrong way to deal with human beings, right? I should treat you with respect. I shouldn't trip you as you're walking out the door. I should compliment you when you do something right. And then there's a right and wrong way to behave towards the gods, or God. There's a form of justice with respect to the gods. And what does that mean? Well, this is where Euthyphro kind of screws up. It means attending to the gods. And what does attending to mean? Socrates says, he says, well, when I attend to my dogs, I'm actually doing something to benefit my dogs. I'm like taking care of them. If I'm tending to a ship, I'm taking care of the ship. How am I taking care of God? Does God need me to take care of him? Or them? Or it? Presumably God can do just fine without me, right? Does God need any single one of you in order to stay God? To be a healthy God? No. Does God need you to explain how not to make bad decisions to God? If he did, he wouldn't be much of a God, would he? Or there'd be something seriously wrong with the universe. So it can't be like that. So then Euthyphro says, well, maybe it means like what slaves do with their masters. That sounds a little bit more like, the way religion is often framed, right? God's way up here, we're way down there. Some religions actually, like the Babylonian one. In the Babylonian creation story, why are human beings created? It's not, in the image of God or, to be companions or anything like that.
Good workers.
To be slaves. To be slaves of the gods. You know why? So the gods don't have to fight each other and make each other slaves. Because somebody's got to be a slave. That's the Babylonian view of things. So Euthyphro says, well, maybe it's like servants and masters. But again, this is a problem, isn't it? If you're somebody's servant, I don't think any of you have ever been somebody's servant, right? You may have felt like it at times. We have this expression, wage slaves. Any of you ever been wage slaves? Working a dead-end job for minimal wage? None of you have? Just try it. It'll change your perspective on things quite a bit. It'll lend you a real good sense of how much things, are worth. What do we do when we work for somebody, when we're helping them out like that? What are we doing? We're trying to benefit them, aren't we? Does that make sense with God again? How do we benefit God? What do we give God? Do we give God anything? Yeah.
Praise.
Praise, okay, that's good. The Greeks gave sacrifices too. We don't do a lot of sacrifices. We might give some money, pass the collection basket around, that can be a sacrifice. You can do other sacrifices too, like, not treating your fellow human beings badly, because when you want to, that could be a sacrifice. Prayer, right? So maybe that would work. Maybe it's sort of a give and take. Does that work? We could take, right? Is there anything that we could give God that God really needs? That's on his wish list? Even the Greek gods, did they need anything? If nobody sacrificed to them, would they quit being gods? They wouldn't like it. So this leads us right back to the starting point, because we had holiness is what's dear to the gods. What can we give the gods? Praise, honor, that sort of stuff. Are we helping them by doing that? No. So why is that good? They like it. It pleases them. Well, we're right back where we started, aren't we? So we've come full circle. And now what happens? What does Euthyphro say at this point? Anyone remember? We've tried out all these different definitions. They haven't figured out what piety is. They do know what it's not. It's not just doing whatever the gods happen to do. Euthyphro says, I got to get going. I'd love to stay and chat with you, Socrates.